Guys, in this video we'll talk about the new Imperial Fist Detachment Emperor's Shield and how it can improve the lives of the Imperial Fist players and also anyone with a custom chapter, to be honest. And if you are into running big blobs of Terminators, durability and sowing death with Thunder Hammers, this video is definitely for you. So without further ado, let's dive right in. As always, let's first talk about the strength. This one is a remake of the first company detachment, which is very interesting considering that traditionally you would think that Imperial Fists belong in the Anvil Siege Force, and that's what I was expecting the remake of to be, because Anvil Siege Force, God almighty, needs a lot of help. For some reason, don't know why, but they decided to go with a remake of a first company detachment, which makes even less sense now that we know that the Iron Hands are also a remake of the first company detachment. So I know the first company detachment is really bad, but I don't think it warrants two remakes. We could have just had one and remade the Anvil Siege Force into something more playable, like they did with the Vanguard, where they just created an improved version of the Vanguard in the Shadow Mark. So I don't know why they did it like they did it, but that's what we have on our hands now. So the main problem of that detachment was that its rule was a one-off, and whenever you have a one-off rule for a detachment, it's almost always going to be bad. In that case, we got full rerolls to wound against a target, the Oath of Moment target, once per game, and we got like the old Oath, which was at the start of 10th edition, the Oath was full rerolls to hit and wound, which was crazy. They quickly stopped that by releasing the Space Marine Codex, which has the Oath of Moment as we know it as rerolls to hit. Then they stapled on the +1 to wound, but that was later. At first, it was just the first company detachment that kept the ability to have the Oath once per game, but obviously that one-off ability does not really cover the benefits of having something the entire game, like Stormlands that has advance and charge the entire game, all turns, whereas you would very, very efficiently kill one thing once in a game. That obviously it's really not a great rule. So the Emperor's Shield actually solves it by giving us the rule that works the entire game, which is great, and it's reroll once to wound against the Oath of Moment targets. Obviously not as strong as the old Oath that gave us the full rerolls to wound, but reroll once to wound against the Oath target is very efficient. It increases your ability to destroy that target efficiently a lot. And if the target is attacked by Lysander's squad, so Captain Lysander and his Terminators, you would be rerolling all the wound rolls as if you had the old Oath of Moment. It's a big upgrade because being able to have an army-wide buff that works all the time and also a little special buff for just his unit, which kind of makes him an auto take in this detachment, but I honestly don't know why you would not run him, is a really interesting twist. My only complaint is that Torgaden doesn't get anything from this detachment, but I guess they really wanted to sell the new models, so they did not even try to give us anything special for the other guy that already exists. So in the case of Vulcan, only he gets the buff. Adrex doesn't really get anything. The Shrike doesn't really get anything as well from the detachment, like a special ability or any upgrade to his data sheet. He's still very good, but he just doesn't get anything special. And the same for the Torgaden and Lysander. Enhancements are similar to the first company detachment, but we've lost the cool 5+ Film and Pain one-off. So once per battle we could have had 5-up Film and Pain on a block of Terminators, which was replaced with conditional but permanent -1 to wound. So it's not really a downgrade, it's a side grade, and actually you could interpret that more of as an upgrade. We need an Ancient to run that enhancement, so there's a little disadvantage of that. You can of course have a Captain still in the unit, so it doesn't restrict you from having other abilities. It's just you pay extra points for Ancient, which you probably would not have taken. Also don't have the cool Fear Made Manifest enhancement, which actually we now know went to the Iron Hands one, and that's the one where you could like combo that failing the battle shock. It caused the battle shock, and if anything in squad failed that battle shock, 1 or D3 models died from that. And obviously for armies like orcs or something like that, for hordes it doesn't mean anything, but for when you're playing against elite armies like Custodes, that is like absolutely devastating. For stratagems, our +1 to hit, +1 to wound stratagem that we used to have in the first company detachment, which was Heroes of the Chapter, it got upgraded, so it's the same, like you choose the veteran squad and you get +1 to hit if the squad is in this case, it's below starting strength, you get +1 to wound as well. For the old stratagem, you had to be below half strength, which obviously is much harder. So if you have a squad of Terminators and they just like lost one dude and that's it, which kind of does happen pretty often to big squads of Terminators, to be honest, then you can easily, for the rest of the game, give them that stratagem, especially if you have a captain in the unit that's like just free, always there, hitting always on 2s and always wounding with +1. And you can use that both in the shooting and the fight phase, so there's added flexibility there. The fight phase Battle Shock stratagem that we used to have in the first company, it got converted into a 3+ fight on death, which honestly, that's an upgrade in my book. You still have the sticky objectives stratagem. We have a good +1 AP and ignore cover stratagem for shooting, though it's limited to only the veteran keywords, which is, it kind of sucks because we only have a few veteran units that can actually shoot. I assume they mean the stratagem mostly for the normal Terminators, where you can get the benefit for the Cyclone missile launchers and the Storm Bolters. But for something like Sternguard veterans, which I also mentioned in that stratagem, it would be cool. It's a good buff, but unfortunately the Sternguard have an anti-synergy with the Detachment because they reroll all wound rolls against the old target, and you are kind of getting the reroll once to wound against the old target. So there is that negative element. We still have the good 1 CP uppy downy stratagem, so teleportation at the end of the fight phase for the Terminators, and that's pretty important because other than that, this detachment doesn't really provide us with a lot of mobility. Overall, I would say that it's definitely a net positive compared to first company detachment, though that detachment was really bad, so it's an upgrade, but an upgrade from a really bad detachment, so it's hard to analyze it. Enhancements are about the same, stratagems are a moderate upgrade over the first company, and definitely a detachment rule is much better, so yeah, it is an upgrade for sure. So if you are an Imperial Fist, staunch Imperial Fist player, you have a pretty decent detachment to run that is specifically Imperial Fists, and if you are into that sort of unique play style, then you should be happy because it definitely is better than either the Anvil Siege Force or the first company detachment. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40K coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. And big thanks to all the Patreon supporters that are already supporting the channel. We really appreciate it. You can actually see all those glorious names in the description of every video. But my video wouldn't be my video if I only gave you the good stuff. Now I want to talk about the bad stuff. So honestly, I am surprised, as I said, that they did not choose to change the Anvil Siege Force and instead went with the first company, because the Anvil Siege Force is the obvious Imperial Fist option and it would be easier to redo because you literally just need to change the detachment rule into anything else. And yeah, you've got a pretty good detachment. It has a lot of positive elements in it, and it doesn't really require, I mean, it requires change, but it would not be as bad, and it would again make sense, especially considering that they are changing the first company detachment into then the Iron Hands one too. We've lost the legendary Fortitude stratagem that used to be part of the first company detachment, is still part of it, and that one is really good because we could make our Blade Guard Terminators very tough to kill in combat, and yeah, this one, it will be missed, and that's definitely true. I mentioned already Torgaredon. Oh, sorry, he's Torgaredon, not Torgaredon. Why did I say that? Didn't receive any buffs with this one, which is a shame considering that he's the only other specific Imperial Fist model, and his ignore cover ability is cute, but doesn't really solve any problems. And I mean, I love his oversized fist that does 4 damage to vehicles and monsters, but you can't really go far with just that. Detachment lacks fallback, shoot, and charge capabilities, which is really important for that veteran playstyle where you have only a couple of squads to play with, and that probably, I would say, is the biggest single problem of this detachment. Last but definitely not least, it genuinely suffers from the why not play Gladius syndrome, and that one is really hard to heal because Gladius is freaking amazing, and the only a few actual detachments like have been able to give us enough to force, or I mean give you an incentive to play not Gladius. So Shadow Mark was a successful attempt, and it was able to heal some by taking the already pretty good Vanguard detachment and just adding just a bit of that flexibility and versatility on top of it, which was what Gladius is powerful because of, and that's why it's such a good detachment. This one I feel, because the foundation for it was one of the worst detachments that we have seen in the game probably, even though they've really tried their best to fix it, it still is hanging on in that like D to C tier range for me, and therefore not uniquely attractive for players unless you are a staunch Imperial Fist player and you just want something Imperial Fist. Don't touch it with your dirty gladius hands. It's just for my yellow perfect armor. Let's talk about the army composition, because even though the detachment is not amazing, it's still pretty good, and you can build something definitely strong enough to consider using that detachment. So first of all, I think we will be building around multiple bricks of Terminators, and for sure Lysander. He's definitely going to lead a 10-man unit of Terminators, which can be either assault or regular ones, depending on what you prefer. Obviously, the assault ones stack better with his durability buff, so they would get more mileage out of that -1 to wound that he provides, which, by the way, his -1 to wound is special because it is conditional still, but it works against attacks that are equal to your toughness in strength, whereas normal conditional -1 to wound is higher or greater strength than your toughness. You still don't get -1 to wound when you're attacked by strength 4 or 3, which, I mean, it's kind of okay. Only orcs have that stupid stratagem in the Warhorde. That's a nice bonus for Lysander. And you also get OC2 on your Terminators thanks to having him in your army, and that is going to make it significantly easier for you to hold objectives, especially once you start losing models, and that's what typically starts happening with Terminator bricks. They get like chipped down model by model by model, turn after turn after turn, whereas your capability to hold them against even smaller squads is getting diminished. So having permanent OC2 on them, or even OC3 if you get the Ancient, and you will have at least one Ancient to have that enhancement for -1 to wound, therefore is going to be even easier for you to hold objectives. Yeah, you definitely are getting the Maladraxian standard for your Ancient for one of the squads to make two Terminator squads -1 to wound in your army. That's a pretty difficult problem to solve for most armies, to try and kill that before it hits your lines. The reason why you want full squads is maximizing that durability and the use of the Fury of the First stratagem that I mentioned before, which allows you to get +1 to hit, but most importantly the +1 to wound if you're below starting strength. So if you are running 5-man squads, the likelihood of you actually utilizing that is pretty low, because if you lose like 1 or 2 models, your squad is only a 3-model Terminator unit and you're not really getting much, even if you get +1 to hit and +1 to wound. However, for a 10-man unit, which drops down to say 8 models, it's still a lot, and you still retain both of your Cyclones and the majority of your capability as a squad. As soon as you lose one guy, you'll be essentially spamming that stratagem every phase whenever you can, as long as you have CP for it. So call me crazy, but I genuinely think that 3x10 Terminators is the way to go for this detachment in multiple configurations of like which Terminators you're going to choose. I also can see the Sternguard being part of this detachment, which they have a pretty good synergy with the 1 CP Discipline Extermination for +1 AP and Ignore Cover, and they really do benefit from it. However, you will have to bear the anti-synergy of their rule being essentially them not benefiting in any way from the detachment rule, because they already have full rerolls to wound against the old target. Actually can do a reasonable captain combo, so when you give your Primaris captain, who is leading a squad of either Assault Intercessors or Sternguard, for full rerolls to wound, you give him some sort of enhancement to buff up his melee, and then once he connects in combat, you can pop the Finest Hour, giving him +3 attacks, devastating wounds, and then you reroll all wound rolls thanks to your squad's ability. So in this case, you can use the Champion of the Feast enhancement. It's less of an enhancement for the captain because it only gives him +1 attack, but it also gives the +1 attack to the entire squad once per game. So it doesn't actually stack on to the captain, so captain only can get 1 extra attack, which I think is lame, to be honest. But yeah, you will get a benefit from it, and your 10-man Sternguard squad is going to have a lot of attacks. And yeah, it's attacks at 0 EP for most of them, except for the Sergeant, but it's still a huge volume of them. And with rerolls to hit, rerolls to wound, potentially, it's going to chip a lot, especially if you're fighting against something that doesn't have like a 3+ save or better. Focusing on Terminators will of course mean less points for all other stuff you want for scoring, which means that you want cheap dedicated scoring units to zip around while you're basically bashing the skulls of your opponents with Terminators. Sticky does help the stratagem, but it's not a replacement for a unit. So there are a couple of options. We have 3-man Blade Guard veteran squads, which are dirt cheap still and have the potential synergy with the stratagems in this detachment for the end game where your main assets are depleted and you want to attack something that is maybe a bit higher defense than your normal scoring units. So maybe you need to finish off an elite unit or a character, and Blade Guard veterans are pretty good at that. And of course we have the plethora of Space Marine scoring units, which is ATVs, very good actually, Incursors, Infiltrators, Scouts, Jumping Intercessors, and Combi Lieutenant, which I think you should not leave home without at least one. And of course, even with +1 AP, +1 to wound, ignore cover, rerolls to hit, reroll ones to wound, and 2 Cyclone missile launchers, which is all the stuff that you can stack on top of a 10-man squad of Terminators in shooting, you still need help with the big stuff like Knights, and ideally something that will not require Oath because you only have one. So in that function, I think Lancer is the best standalone option because he gets his own rerolls. He doesn't really need any help from anyone, and yeah, it's just a reliable shooting platform. You will do a lot of work with that 10-man squad of Terminators, don't get me wrong, but if you need to remove a tank from the board, you might as well start with shooting 2 Lancers at it and then see if there's anything left. And if there's anything left, you can always charge it or do anything else that you want to, but very likely you will not have that problem on your hands anymore. Vindicators, Eradicators, and Scepters are all very good as well. The Eradicators and the Scepters don't have the detachment rule synergy, but honestly, you need units that don't rely on Oath as well as those that rely on Oath, so it's not that big of a disadvantage. It's a shame that Eradicators and Inceptors are not technically veterans, so they don't get to use the +1 AP and ignore cover stratagem, which honestly, I just need to say this. I think it's dumb that in this detachment, we have to specifically choose the veteran units and only they can use the +1 AP and ignore cover, which, yeah, provided +1 AP and ignore cover is an amazing buff for 1 command point. But the fact that we only can use it on veterans means that we are limiting, and they know it, some of the best infantry or overall shooting units that we have in the Space Marine Codex. And therefore, it needs to be amazing. Like, why do we in Shadow Mark Talon have the stratagem that gives us +1 ballistic skill and also AP if you're shooting outside of 12, which, I mean, that's not that difficult to arrange. It's not really big of a restriction. And that can be applied to any Adeptus Astartes infantry. Why do we have to jump through so many hoops in this particular instance just because they thought that it's cool that the stratagem is going to only work for the veterans? I think all of these stratagems, all of them, should always be worded like, you get this benefit if you are anything, and you get this benefit plus that cool thing if you are also a veteran. That would make sense. So if you are just any kind of unit, you get to say ignore cover or add one to the AP, whichever one. Or if you are a veteran, you actually get +1 AP and ignore cover. Some of the best detachments in this game actually have this multi-capacity, like multi-layers to their stratagem, which essentially mean that you have multiple stratagem inside one. And because we are limited to only 6 stratagems per detachment, in case of Space Marine ones, it's essentially 5 because Armor of Contempt is not... I don't really even consider it a stratagem at this point. It's more like a core rule. But yeah, all of these cases where we are super limited by keywords, I really don't like it. It used to be cool when we had like 30 stratagems in a codex in 8th and 9th edition, and you could just flip through pages and find a very special stratagem that just works on Sanguinary Guard, for example. And that was cool, that was unique. But now that we only have 6, you really want every single stratagem to be applicable to pretty much anything, and only when detachment is really skewed. And I don't think this one is skewed enough to make sense for you to only run that stuff. So yeah, that's my opinion in this matter. Last but definitely not least, let's look at the roster example that I've built for the Emperor's Shield. And by the way, I just want to say the aesthetics of Imperial Fists are amazing. They are some of the most vibrant and cool looking Space Marine chapters, in my humble opinion, out of them all. Maybe it's just because I love the yellow color so much, I don't know. But I love Imperial Fists, I love their lore, and I really want them to be good. Last time they were really, really good was, I think, in 8th edition when they got that crazy detachment, or not detachment, it was rule, whatever it was called back then, when they could spam crazy, what we now call sustain hits on their bolters. And their shooting was just obnoxious, especially like on Centurion Devastators with heavy bolters. That was just horrifying. They have not been that good ever since. So I really, really want them to be at least good. So for this 2,000 points, what I have is just two characters, Ancient and Terminator armor for the Maladraxin standard, for the -1 to wound. Darnath Fly standard, you need that guy, and he's also pretty reasonably priced at 100 points. We have 2x3 Blega veteran squads, and this is just to follow the theme of veterans. If you want to have it a bit more, I would say, more flexible, I would use, instead of the Blega veterans, I would use something like Incursors or Reavers, or you could do just normal Intercessors, to be honest, because those give you more tactical flexibility. But if you want to follow the theme of veterans and have the stratagem support, then Blega veterans are also a pretty good option. So it's not, both can work, in my humble opinion. So 2x3 Blega veteran squads, 3 Gladiator Lancers, because we need that shooting, 2 Invader ATVs with multi-melters. They are cheap, they are really, really good for scoring, and 3x10 Terminator squads. Actually, 1 Terminator squad with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields, the one that is going to be led by Lysander, and 2x10 Terminator squads with the Power Fists, Storm Bolters, and Cyclone Missile Launchers. And that comes down to 1995, which I hate. I typically never have that, but just in this case, I didn't want to try to get that extra point out of here. So what we could do here, obviously, is we could get the Combi Weapon Lieutenant by potentially downgrading the Blega veterans to something like Scouts, which would free up 10 points, and then we could upgrade the ATV, one of the ATVs, to a Combi Weapon Lieutenant. So the scoring part of this list can easily be changed, but I kind of like the idea of having 3 Terminator bricks on top of 3 Lancers. It's an interesting combo. Obviously, it really wants to have the additional flexibility with movements, so something like Wrath of the Rock, where we have the first turn deep strike, and then we have on top of that the ability to advance and charge. So that would be a big buff, and that's not what we have here. But we do have the reroll once to wound against oath target, which is going to be helpful during the course of the game, especially if you manage to keep your Terminator bricks alive, and that will require your careful positioning and very, very skillful use of rapid ingress strategy. Talking about that, don't forget that because you have the dropship extraction stratagem, the 1 CP up and down for Terminators in this detachment, you can always keep one of the blobs that you are planning to deep strike. You can keep it on the table turn 1, and then turn 1, if your opponent goes first, at the end of their fight phase, it doesn't matter that they haven't fought, you still can send them up into space, and that means that you can then deep strike them turn 1, because the only limitation to why you cannot deep strike turn 1 is for units that started the game not on the table. So if you actually deep strike them, if you pull them off the table on their turn 1, and then your turn 1, you can actually put them on the table. And that is a very cool combo, so keep that in mind, which means that you probably want to have one of these bricks on the table at the start of the game, maybe even 2. So you can deep strike them turn 1 and then Rapid Ingress turn 2 with the other squad, so you can have like 3 waves of Terminator squads appearing on the table. Let me know what you think about this Imperial Fists detachment. I kind of like the direction that they're going with, and I'm really, really glad that GW are giving the less popular Space Marine chapters more detachments. I mean, it's not like Space Marines are suffering from the case of not having enough options. We definitely don't. But me as a Space Marine first player, I am really, really thankful for it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think about the list that I wrote. If you would change something, I would really love to hear that in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.